Yeah, she's laying down unconscious, possibly even dead, but definitely unconscious. Right next to her, there's a huge cinder block. I take this and I smash her head in with it completely. Yeah, her face basically, collapses in.
After 18 years, we can finally answer the question, what happened to Natalee Holloway? Natalee disappeared in 2005 during a graduation trip to Aruba, and her story became national news for months. She was young, smart, beautiful, and on the last night of her trip, she vanished. Part of what made the case so sensational was the fact that from day one, people thought they knew who did it. The hunch was that this guy, Joran van der Sloot, the last person to see her alive, was the one responsible for her disappearance. Sadly, nearly 2 decades of speculation turned out to be right. Natalee was murdered by the Dutch national, a boy she barely even knew. Joran, now 36, is currently serving 28 years in prison for murder, but not the murder of Natalee Holloway. And just last week, he was sentenced to another 20 years behind bars, but again, not for murdering Natalee. The conviction was for trying to extort money from her parents in exchange for information about her whereabouts. It's all very confusing. Why, after all this time, did we suddenly find out what happened to Natalee Holloway, and why hasn't her killer been charged? Joran van der Sloot confessed to ruthlessly murdering Natalee the night they met because she didn't want to have sex with him, and then he disposed of her body in the ocean. He admitted this in a taped interview with law enforcement as part of a plea deal in a related case.
We start kissing each other. She tells me no, tells me she doesn't want me to feel her up. Insist, I keep feeling her up either way. Ends up kneeing me in the crotch, and I kick her extremely hard in the face. Yeah, she's laying down unconscious, possibly even dead, but definitely unconscious. Right next to her, there's a huge cinder block. I take this and I smash her head in with it completely. Yeah, her face basically, collapses in. Even though it's dark, I can see her face is collapsed in.
Now that audio, which was released by authorities, is just chilling. He's completely devoid of emotion as he recounts the brutality of kicking Holloway practically to unconsciousness and then finishing the job by bashing her head in with a cinder block. Her body will probably never be found. This is the tragic end to a heartbreaking saga for Natalee's family. But to understand how we ended up here with that cold and callous confession, let me bring you back to 2005 when this all started. 18-year-old Natalee Holloway was your typical American teenager in the early aughts. She was a member of the National Honor Society, student government, school dance team, and she volunteered. In an interview with the AP, her uncle said that Natalee wasn't a party girl, and he referred to her as naive, a sentiment that has been echoed by her mom. To celebrate high school graduation, a large group of students from Mountain Brook, Alabama took a trip to Aruba. Now, I feel like a lot of these details have been lost over the intervening years, and there's a fair amount of misinformation about this aspect of the case. This photo of Natalee and her girlfriends from the day she vanished has been featured in nearly every news story about the case. I think it led people to believe that Holloway and just a handful of other teens were just gallivanting around Aruba unsupervised. Picture MTV Spring Break, Girls Gone Wild videos. Now, this all happened during that era. But just for clarity, the vacation to Aruba wasn't that. Roughly 130 students were on a week-long senior trip, along with 7 adult chaperones. Yes, there was absolutely drinking and partying among the students. I mean, the legal age in Aruba is 18, so that's understandable, but how excessive the group was is still up for debate. Chaperones from the trip have said publicly several times over the years that the students were well behaved, and reports of them being out of control were simply false. However, Police Commissioner Gerald Dompeg is quoted in Vanity Fair saying that the students engaged in, quote, wild partying, a lot of drinking, lots of room switching every night. We know the Holiday Inn told them they weren't welcome next year. Natalee, we know she drank all day, every day. We have statements. She started every morning with cocktails, so much drinking that Natalee didn't show up for breakfast 2 mornings. Obviously, from an investigative standpoint, I understand that you want to know exactly what your missing person was doing in the days leading up to their disappearance, but these statements never sat well with me. It always felt a little like victim blaming, but that's just my opinion. And to be fair, at the time there was speculation that she may have just gotten drunk and accidentally drowned. On the last night of their trip, May 29th, 2005, Natalee and some friends went to a popular area bar called Carlos and Charlie's. There, she met up with a group of local guys around her age, Joran van der Sloot, Deepak Kalpoe, and his brother Satish Kalpoe. Natalee and Joran had apparently hit it off at the club, and in the early hours of May 30th, the 3 guys were seen leaving Carlos and Charlie's with Natalee in tow. Now, I mentioned there being chaperones on this trip. The majority of the students were 18, and chaperones said well behaved, so they were kind of allowed to do what they wanted, but the adults did check in with them every day. Now, one of these chaperones, who was also a teacher at Mountain Brook High, detailed the final night of the trip in an interview with Greta Van Susteren back in '05. According to Bob Plummer, on the morning of the 30th, the group became alarmed when Natalee didn't show up to catch the buses to the airport. Plummer said that the adults immediately questioned the other students for more details, and they learned that she hadn't been seen since the previous night. He was told that her friends saw her at the nightclub, quote, leaving with these guys in a car, a silver car. The last time anyone saw Natalee alive was at 1:30 a.m. with Sloot and his two pals, one of whom drove a silver car. Natalee's mom, Beth Twitty, her stepdad, Jug Twitty, and a few of their friends flew to Aruba immediately after learning of her disappearance. They were there the very same day. It was actually Beth who first discovered Joran Vandersloot's name from a Holiday Inn employee. Joran was 17 at the time and an honors student at the International School of Aruba. So Beth brought the name to the Aruban authorities, and here begins a contentious relationship between the family and the cops. Over the years, the Twitties have accused the police of corruption and even got the governor of Alabama at one point to call for a boycott of the island nation. Meanwhile, the police in Aruba have accused Natalee's family of being a hindrance to their investigation into her disappearance. But from the day Natalee went missing, investigators and her family did agree on one thing. They believed Joran knew something. Less than 24 hours after she was last seen, two uniformed police officers showed up to Joran's home along with Natalee's mom, stepdad, and a local businessman, and they demanded answers. For some odd, inexplicable reason, the police let this random local businessman, Charles Crows, question Vandersloot that night. Crows spoke with Vanity Fair back in 2005 and recounted what he was told by Joran. Quote, I snuck out of my house and went over to see her. She came on to me huge, dancing suggestively like a slut. I did belly shots on her on the bar. Joran claims that Natalee was highly intoxicated and asked him to take her home. The next part he said, at least we know to be true. Joran said that he and his two friends piled into a car with Natalee and drove off, which is what eyewitnesses have reported seeing. From there, Joran said they drove her to the Holiday Inn where she was staying and she just stumbled inside alone. That was the last time he saw her. But in the same conversation, his story changed. Joran then told Crows that Natalee wanted to drive around and was acting, quote, crazy, saying weird things, like comparing her mom to Hitler, admitting she was a virgin, saying she was a lesbian, but then asking him to have sex with her and claimed that she performed oral sex on him in the car. Now, it's always been a question as to whether or not Natalee's ever been seen on surveillance cameras at the Holiday Inn that night, something that could have corroborated Joran's first version of the story. Some reports said she was just never seen on surveillance. Others said the cameras weren't even working, but of course now it's a moot point since we know she never returned that night. The search and rescue operation was massive. Natalee's family basically moved to Aruba, refusing to leave without her. Aruban authorities, international law enforcement, and the FBI all joined together to search for the missing teen. The first arrests made in this case were two former security guards who were taken into custody under suspicion of kidnapping and murder, but there was no evidence against them, so they were quickly released. Then, on June 9th, Vandersloot and the Calpo brothers were arrested and questioned. Things at this point were an absolute circus. You got these three in custody, followed by several other arrests, including Joran's father. The media had descended on the small island nation, and Natalee's family was there raising hell that she hadn't been found. Under questioning, Vandersloot and the Calpos kept changing their stories. First, they didn't actually drop her off at the Holiday Inn, they took her to the Marriott. Then it was the Calpos who left Natalee and Joran alone, and then they went home. Then it was Joran who went home alone and left Natalee with the Calpos. Needless to say, the ever-changing stories didn't look good for them, but the cops had no hard evidence to connect the trio with the disappearance. By July 4th, the brothers were released, but Vandersloot was held for 60 days and then let go. Over the course of the investigation, there were several arrests and rearrests. They just led nowhere. Joran publicly maintained his innocence, and he gave several interviews to that effect, most notably sitting down with Greta Van Susteren.
So next then she said, okay, so let's take another shot is what she told me. So she wanted to take a shot with me, but it was probably close to 1 a.m. there then, and that bar was closing. So I said, okay, well, we can go to the other bar. And then I asked her, what do you want to drink? And she's like, whatever. So she said, yeah, she said, what do you suggest? And I said, Bacardi 151. Because that's a shot I normally take with my friends. And we took a shot together. And after that, we just were talking a while. I saw Satish, and Satish said, let's go. And then Dipako, I don't know where he was. They didn't see him in caution charges after that.
In 2007, Vandersloot co-authored a book about Natalee's disappearance and the resulting investigation, still saying he didn't do it. That same year, he and the Kalpos were arrested again. They were released again, and the case was finally closed due to insufficient evidence. It was reopened the following year after Joran was secretly recorded discussing her death, only in this version of the story. He was with her, she was having convulsions, and he tried to save her life. In 2009, he gave an interview to Fox News stating a new story. This one, that he sold Natalee on the black market and had her trafficked to Venezuela. He also implicated his father in this scheme and even gave the news outlet an audio recording of his dad discussing the trafficking, but it was later determined that the voice was just Joran pretending to be his father. This brings us to 2010, which is the most critical year in this whole saga, and it's what brings us to our confession this month. Joran contacted Natalee's family and tried to extort them for $250,000 in 2010. He taunted Natalee's mom, Beth Twitty, with the promise of detailed information about what really happened that night in 2005 and where Natalee's remains were. Vandersloot asked for $25,000 to start, then he would give her the information, and in exchange, she would send him the remaining $225K. This is totally illegal, and the Twitties, of course, got the FBI involved. So the feds set up a sting operation and had money wired to Vandersloot's account. Joran got the cash, and then he didn't even make good on his promise. He ended up giving Twitty false information about Natalee's body, telling her he dumped it in a house on the island, a home that had not even been built in 2005. As a result of this sting operation, 5 years after Natalee Holloway disappeared, Vandersloot was indicted in Birmingham, Alabama for extortion. But between the extortion attempt and that indictment for extortion, Joran killed again, and he did it on the 5-year anniversary of Natalee's disappearance. Literally 5 years to the day, May 30th, 2010, 21-year-old Stephanie Flores Ramirez was reported missing in Lima, Peru. Her body was found a few days later in a hotel room, a room that was registered to Joran Vandersloot. Joran confessed to police that Ramirez had used his laptop without permission and found something on there that connected him to Natalee's disappearance. She confronted him about it, and he attacked her. He admitted to smashing her head against a wall and then smothering her to death with a shirt. He then stole her casino winnings and fled, telling staff on the way out not to bother his girlfriend who was in the room. When her body was discovered 3 days later, Joran had made it as far as Chile, where he was arrested and extradited back to Peru. He pled guilty and was sentenced to 28 years in a Peruvian prison for first-degree murder and robbery, which is a light sentence if you ask me. During an interrogation, though, he admitted to extorting Natalee's mom. And prior to his sentencing, he gave an interview to a Dutch paper for some reason, explaining why he did it. Telling De Telegraaf, quote, "I wanted to get back at Natalee's family. Her parents have been making my life tough for 5 years. When they offered to pay for the girl's location, I thought, well, why not?" Natalee was legally declared dead in 2012, the same year Vandersloot began his sentence for Stephanie's murder. More than a decade later, he agreed to a plea deal in his U.S. extortion case. In exchange for pleading guilty and a 20-year sentence, Joran would confess to the murder of Natalee Holloway and finally reveal the location of her remains. He was temporarily extradited from Peru to face the music inside of an Alabama courtroom. He recorded that chilling audio that we heard earlier and confessed in a proffer letter to smashing Natalee's face in with a cinder block and throwing her in the Caribbean Sea. In court, Natalee's mom, Beth, finally had the chance to look her daughter's killer in the face and tell him in her victim impact statement, "You look like hell, Joran. I do not see how you're gonna make it." Joran has lied time and time again about what happened that night, so I was hesitant to initially believe that this time was the truth. However, he did pass a polygraph this time around, and he also offered his seemingly first glimpse of remorse, saying in court, quote, "I would like to take this chance to apologize to the Holloway family, to apologize to my own family, to say I hope the statement I provided brings some kind of closure to everyone involved. I am no longer that person I was back then. I've given my heart to Jesus Christ." Now, the U.S. has no jurisdiction to prosecute Vandersloot for murder. That is up to the courts in Aruba, and unfortunately, the Dutch enclave has a statute of limitations on murder of 12 years, which passed in 2017. There was a glimmer of hope, however. This week, Aruban authorities contacted the DOJ to request documents from his extortion case, including Vandersloot's murder confession. A spokesperson for the prosecutor's office in Aruba told the AP they will review and analyze them before deciding on the procedural steps to be taken against Joran Vandersloot. Despite the statute of limitations, they say Natalee's case is still an open investigation. For the time being, though, Joran's 20-year sentence for extortion will be the only justice that Natalee's family has. That sentence is being served concurrently with his murder rap in Peru. And in 2021, Joran actually had more time tacked onto the Peruvian sentence for trafficking cocaine into prison. He is eligible for release in 2045. For more true crime content like this, hit like and subscribe.